They heard it first. That was what German infantrymen remembered most clearly about their first encounter with American rifle fire in Normandy. Not the sight of muzzle flashes in the hedgerows, not the whistle of bullets passing overhead, but the sound, a sustained, rapid crackling that seemed impossible for bolt-action rifles to produce. Something was wrong with the mathematics of what they were hearing. Obergefreiter Hans Weber, serving with the 352nd Infantry Division near St. Lo in July of 1944, had been fighting since Poland in 1939. He knew the rhythm of infantry combat, the sharp crack of a carabiner 98K, followed by the distinctive sound of a soldier working the bolt, ejecting the spent cartridge, chambering a new round, then firing again. A trained rifleman could manage perhaps 15 aimed shots per minute. The sound pattern was predictable. Crack. Brief pause as the bolt cycles. Crack. Another pause. Crack. What Weber heard in the hedgerows of Normandy followed no pattern he recognized. American positions erupted with sustained fire that sounded like multiple rifles firing in perfect coordination, except the volume suggested far fewer men than such a rate of fire should require. The bullets came in waves, 8 or 9 rounds arriving in such rapid succession that they seemed almost continuous, followed by a distinctive metallic ping, then another wave. Weber, crouched behind a stone wall with his squad, tried to count the American riflemen based on the volume of fire. His estimate kept changing. The fire discipline seemed professional, controlled, not the wild spraying of inexperienced troops, but the sheer number of rounds coming at his position suggested either a much larger force or something fundamentally different about American small arms. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. When the engagement ended and Weber's squad withdrew to their secondary positions, he asked his squad leader, Feldwebel Ernst Hoffmann, what he thought they had faced. Hoffmann, a veteran of France in 1940 and Russia since 1941, shook his head. He had no explanation. The volume of fire exceeded what bolt-action rifles should produce, yet they had seen no machine gun positions, heard none of the sustained fire characteristic of the MG-42. That evening, at the company command post in a damaged farmhouse, their battalion intelligence officer briefed the assembled squad leaders and platoon commanders on what German intelligence had learned about American infantry weapons. The Americans, he explained, had equipped their entire rifle strength with a semi-automatic weapon called the M1 Garand. Every American infantryman carried a rifle that fired as fast as he could pull the trigger, 8 rounds without reloading, then automatically ejected the empty clip and was ready for a fresh one. The room fell silent. Hoffmann broke it. Every infantryman? He asked. Not just designated marksmen or assault troops? Every rifleman, the intelligence officer confirmed. Standard issue. It is their primary infantry weapon. The implications settled over the assembled German soldiers with the weight of something that changes calculations. They had believed they understood American industrial capacity, American material advantages. Everyone knew the Americans had more trucks, more artillery, more of everything. But this was different. This was not about having more of the same weapons Germany used. This was a different approach to the most basic tool of infantry combat. The rifle. The weapon every soldier carried, the foundation of all infantry tactics. The Karabiner 98 Kurz was not merely a weapon to the German soldier. It was the culmination of a design philosophy stretching back to 1898, when Paul Mauser perfected the bolt-action rifle that would bear his name and influence military small arms design for generations. The Gewehr 98, the original pattern, had armed German soldiers through the First World War with a reputation for accuracy, reliability, and robust construction that earned respect even from enemies. When the Treaty of Versailles restricted German military production and when rearmament began in earnest in the 1930s, the design was refined into the Carabiner 98 Kurz. The Kurz meant short, distinguishing it from the longer rifle versions. At 43.6 inches in overall length and weighing 8.6 pounds when loaded with 5 rounds, the Kar 98K represented what German military planners considered the optimal balance of weight, accuracy, and stopping power. The rifle fired the 7.92 by 57 mm Mauser cartridge, a round developed specifically for military use with a muzzle velocity of approximately 2,500 feet per second. The cartridge was powerful enough to remain effective at ranges exceeding 500 meters, accurate enough for trained marksmen to engage targets at 800 meters or beyond under favorable conditions. The bolt action was smooth, reliable, capable of functioning in the mud of Poland, the dust of North Africa, and the frozen hell of the Russian winter. German doctrine emphasized marksmanship. Soldiers trained extensively with their rifles, learning to estimate range, adjust for wind, and deliver accurate fire under combat conditions. The emphasis was on hitting what you aimed at, making every shot count. Ammunition discipline was constantly reinforced. German infantry squad tactics were built around the machine gun, specifically the MG-34 and later the MG-42. The machine gun was the primary source of firepower. Riflemen supported the machine gun, protected it, provided covering fire while it repositioned and engaged targets the machine gun could not effectively address. This was not an accident of doctrine. It reflected German understanding of infantry combat developed through extensive experience. The machine gun delivered suppressive fire in controlled sectors. The rifle delivered precision fire against individual targets. Each weapon had its role. The system worked. It had worked in Poland, in France, in the Balkans, in North Africa, and for the first years in Russia. German infantrymen trusted their rifles because their rifles had performed as designed in every environment and against every enemy Germany had fought since 1939. When German intelligence agencies began receiving reports about American semi-automatic rifle development in the late 1930s, the information was noted but not considered alarming. Semi-automatic rifles were not new. Germany itself had experimented with semi-automatic designs, including the Gewehr 41, which saw limited service. The Soviet Union had fielded the SVT-40, a semi-automatic rifle that equipped significant numbers of Soviet infantry units. The German evaluation of these weapons was consistent. Semi-automatic rifles offered higher rates of fire, but at significant costs. They were heavier than bolt-action rifles, more complex mechanically, more prone to malfunction in adverse conditions, and more difficult to manufacture. They consumed ammunition at rates that created logistics problems. And for well-trained riflemen who understood fire discipline, the additional rate of fire offered marginal tactical advantage, because accurate aimed fire was more valuable than volume. The United States Army entered the 20th century with the Springfield Model 1898, a bolt-action rifle that borrowed heavily from Mauser design. When that rifle was refined into the Springfield Model 1903, American ordnance officers had created a weapon comparable to any military rifle in the world. It was accurate, reliable, and well-suited to the deliberate marksmanship that American military doctrine emphasized. But even as the Springfield was adopted, some American ordnance specialists questioned whether the bolt-action rifle represented the final evolution of military small arms. John Cantius Garand, a Canadian-born engineer working at the Springfield Armory, believed something better was possible. A rifle that maintained the accuracy and reliability of a bolt-action weapon while eliminating the manual cycling that slowed rate of fire and required the shooter to break his sight picture between shots. Garand began work on a semi-automatic rifle design in 1921. His approach was methodical, conservative in some ways, revolutionary in others. He retained the traditional rifle format, wooden stock, long barrel, iron sights. He kept the weight reasonable, knowing that soldiers would resist a rifle that was significantly heavier than what they were accustomed to carrying. He designed for reliability, understanding that mechanical complexity was the enemy of field serviceability. His key innovation was the operating system. The M1 Garand used gas operation, tapping a small amount of the expanding gas from a fired cartridge to cycle the action. When the rifle fired, gas pressure drove a piston that unlocked the bolt, extracted the spent cartridge, ejected it, cocked the hammer, and chambered a fresh round from the internal magazine. The entire cycle took a fraction of a second. The shooter simply pulled the trigger again for the next shot. The rifle fed from an en-bloc clip holding 8 rounds, the clip itself inserted into the rifle's internal magazine from the top. When the last round was fired, the empty clip was automatically ejected with the distinctive ping that would become famous. The system was elegant in its simplicity, requiring no external magazine to carry or lose, no complicated reloading procedure under stress. Development took years. Early prototypes suffered from various mechanical problems. Gas system pressures had to be precisely calibrated. The operating rod needed strengthening. The clip ejection mechanism required refinement, but by 1936, Garand had a rifle that worked reliably, met Army specifications for accuracy and durability, and offered sustained rate of fire that no bolt-action rifle could match. In January of 1936, after extensive testing at Springfield Armory and Aberdeen Proving Ground, the United States Army adopted the rifle as the M1. It was designated the U.S. rifle, caliber .30 M1. Soldiers would call it the Garand. The decision to adopt a semi-automatic rifle as the standard infantry weapon was unprecedented among major powers. It represented an enormous commitment of resources and a fundamental reimagining of infantry firepower. The rifle was more expensive to manufacture than a bolt-action weapon. It required more machining, more precision, more quality control. But American ordnance planners, backed by Army Chief of Staff General Douglas MacArthur, believed the tactical advantages justified the costs. Production began slowly. Springfield Armory manufactured the first service rifles in 1937. Winchester Repeating Arms Company received a production contract and began manufacturing M1s in 1941. As war approached and then arrived, production accelerated. By 1943, American industry was producing M1 Garands at rates exceeding 4,000 rifles per day. The M1 Garand, unloaded, weighed 9.5 pounds. Loaded with its 8-round clip of .30-06 ammunition, the weight increased to approximately 10 pounds. This was heavier than the Carabiner 98 Kurz by roughly 1.5 pounds. For German ordnance officers evaluating the weapon from captured examples and intelligence reports, this weight difference represented a significant tactical liability. Infantry soldiers carried their rifles constantly, on the march, during advances in defensive positions, while digging foxholes while sleeping. The rifle was always present. Every pound of additional weight was a pound of reduced endurance, slower movement, greater fatigue over the course of a day's combat operations. German doctrine emphasized mobility, particularly in offensive operations. The lighter Kar 98K facilitated this mobility. A memorandum circulated among German infantry training units in late 1943 after American forces had engaged German troops in North Africa and Italy, noted that the American M1 rifle was excessively heavy for sustained infantry operations. The assessment concluded that while the semi-automatic mechanism provided higher instantaneous rates of fire, the additional weight would degrade soldier effectiveness during prolonged marches and multi-day operations. This evaluation was not entirely wrong. American soldiers did complain about the Garand's weight, particularly in the Pacific where heat and humidity made every ounce of equipment feel heavier. Paratroopers objected to the rifle's length, which made it awkward during jumps. Some soldiers missed the Springfield's slightly lighter weight and familiar manual of arms. The Garand was not a perfect weapon, and its weight was a legitimate consideration. But the German assessment focused on the wrong variable. It evaluated the rifle as an isolated piece of equipment, rather than as one component in a larger system of infantry firepower and logistics. The calculation of whether the additional weight was justified required understanding what that weight purchased in tactical capability, and German doctrine did not provide a framework for properly valuing what the Garand offered. The arithmetic of firepower was straightforward for anyone willing to calculate it. A German rifleman with a Kar 98K, well trained in the manual of arms, could fire approximately 15 aimed shots per minute under combat conditions. This assumed the soldier was in a relatively stable firing position, not under heavy suppression, and had ammunition readily available. 20 shots per minute was possible for exceptional shooters under ideal conditions, but 15 was a realistic combat average. The M1 Garand, in the hands of a trained American rifleman, could fire 40 to 50 aimed shots per minute. The semi-automatic action eliminated the manual bolt cycling that consumed time between shots. The shooter maintained his sight picture. His cheek remained on the stock. His supporting hand never left its position. He simply pulled the trigger, absorbed the recoil, reacquired the target, and pulled the trigger again. 8 rounds in approximately 9 seconds was standard, not exceptional performance. When the 8-round clip was empty, the soldier inserted a fresh clip in roughly 2 to 3 seconds. The rifle was ready to fire again immediately. Contrast this with the Kar 98K, where reloading required the soldier to open the bolt, insert 5 loose rounds individually, or use a stripper clip to charge the internal magazine, close the bolt, and resume firing. The process took longer, required more manual dexterity, and interrupted the soldier's engagement with the target. The difference in sustained rate of fire was not marginal, it was transformational. An 8-man American rifle squad could deliver approximately 320 to 400 aimed shots per minute from their Garands alone, not counting the Browning automatic rifle carried by 1 or 2 men in the squad, not counting the carbines carried by squad leaders and specialists. A comparable German rifle squad with Kar 98K rifles could deliver approximately 120 aimed shots per minute from their bolt-action rifles. The American squad had more than double the rifle firepower, and this calculation did not account for the psychological impact of receiving sustained, rapid fire from multiple directions. German soldiers who experienced this fire often reported feeling outnumbered, believing they faced larger American forces than were actually present, because the volume of fire suggested more riflemen than the Americans had deployed. Private First Class Robert Leckie of the 1st Marine Division encountered Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal who had captured a few M1 Garands from early engagements. The Japanese did not adopt the weapon for their own use, despite having access to examples and despite their own Type 99 rifle being a bolt-action design similar in concept to the Kar 98K. Japanese after-action reports noted the Garand's effectiveness, but considered it unsuitable for Japanese forces due to its weight, length, and ammunition consumption. German forces first encountered the M1 Garand in significant numbers during Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa in November of 1942. American soldiers landing in Morocco and Algeria carried Garands as their standard infantry weapon. The initial engagements were against Vichy French forces, but when American and German units clashed in Tunisia in early 1943, German infantry experienced American rifle fire for the first time. The Battle of Kasserine Pass in February of 1943 was a German tactical victory, demonstrating American inexperience in armored warfare and combined arms operations. German forces under Generalfeld Marshal Erwin Rommel inflicted heavy casualties on American units, captured significant numbers of prisoners and equipment, and drove American forces back from their initial positions. But even in defeat, American infantry demonstrated something that German after-action reports noted with interest. A German company commander, whose unit had overrun an American defensive position near Kasserine, reported that the volume of small arms fire his men received was significantly heavier than expected given the number of American soldiers in the position. He noted that American riflemen maintained higher rates of fire than German doctrine predicted, and that American positions remained effective longer during assaults because soldiers could continue firing while displacing, something more difficult with bolt-action rifles. These observations were compiled in intelligence summaries and distributed to German units, but they were not treated as urgent tactical problems requiring doctrinal adjustment. The battle had been a German victory. American forces had been pushed back. The rifle, regardless of its rate of fire, had not prevented German success. The German evaluation remained that American material superiority was evident but not decisive, and that German tactical skill compensated for any equipment advantages the Americans possessed. Sicily, invaded in July of 1943, provided more data. German forces defending the island against American and British assault encountered American infantry across diverse terrain, from beaches to mountains to urban areas. The fighting was intense, often at close range where rifle fire was the primary weapon for both sides. German soldiers reported that American infantry fire was notably heavier than British fire, a distinction they attributed to the M1 Garand versus the British Lee-Enfield bolt-action rifle. One German lieutenant, interviewed after being captured near Palermo, stated that his platoon had engaged an American patrol in broken terrain where machine guns could not effectively operate. His men, armed with Kar 98K rifles, had fired approximately 150 rounds during the 5-minute engagement. He estimated the Americans, whom he believed numbered 8 to 10 soldiers, had fired at least 300 rounds, possibly more. His observation was accurate. 8 American riflemen with Garands could easily fire 300 rounds in 5 minutes, 37 to 38 rounds per man, less than 5 full clips each. The Italian campaign, beginning with the Salerno landings in September of 1943 and continuing through the brutal fighting at Monte Cassino and the Anzio beachhead into 1944, provided German forces with extensive experience against American infantry. The terrain favored defense, and German units fought skillfully, making the Allies pay heavily for every mile of advance. But in the close-range firefights that characterized much of the Italian fighting, German soldiers consistently noted the volume and intensity of American rifle fire. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. After-action reports from German units in Italy began including tactical recommendations for engaging American infantry. These recommendations emphasized the importance of immediately suppressing American positions with machine gun fire before they could establish sustained rifle fire, the value of engaging at longer ranges where German marksmanship training provided advantages, and the necessity of quickly closing with American positions in assault to minimize exposure to their superior rate of fire. When American forces landed at Utah Beach and Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944, they brought with them a fully equipped, fully trained army that had absorbed the lessons of North Africa and Italy. The M1 Garand was not experimental equipment or a weapon being introduced to combat for the first time. It was standard issue, familiar to every rifleman, integrated into American infantry doctrine and tactics. The German forces defending Normandy were not the elite formations that had conquered France in 1940. Many units were under strength, filled with older soldiers, men recovering from wounds suffered on the Eastern Front or conscripts from occupied territories. The 352nd Infantry Division, manning positions near St. Lo, was considered a static defense division, suitable for occupation duty, but not rated for mobile operations. But these soldiers knew their weapons and knew infantry tactics. They had prepared defensive positions throughout the hedgerow country of Normandy, positions that leveraged the terrain's natural advantages. The hedgerows, thick earthen berms topped with dense vegetation and trees, divided the landscape into small fields that channeled movement and created natural strongpoints. German planners believed this terrain favored the defender, allowed smaller forces to delay larger ones, and minimized the American advantages in armor and artillery. The hedgerow fighting that developed in June and July of 1944 became some of the most difficult combat American forces experienced in the European theater. Every field was a separate battle. Visibility was limited to dozens of yards. Armor struggled to maneuver. Artillery was effective but could not cover every hedgerow. Infantry had to clear each position through direct assault, and German defenders made them pay for every yard. In this environment, the M1 Garand proved its value conclusively. American infantrymen advancing on German positions could lay down suppressive fire while moving, something extremely difficult with bolt-action rifles. When German soldiers exposed themselves to fire, American riflemen could engage with multiple rapid shots before the target could take cover. When American units were caught in German ambushes, they could immediately return heavy fire without needing to coordinate machine gun deployment. Obergefreiter Hans Weber, whose squad was defending a hedgerow position east of St. Lo, experienced this firepower in an engagement in mid-July. His squad occupied a well-prepared position with good fields of fire across an open field, approximately 100 meters wide. When American soldiers emerged from the opposite hedgerow and began advancing, Weber's squad opened fire with their Kar 98K rifles and their MG-42 machine gun. The Americans went to ground immediately, taking whatever cover the field offered: small depressions, a damaged cart, scattered debris. Then they began returning fire. Weber, reloading his rifle after his initial 5 shots, heard the volume of incoming fire increase to levels that seemed impossible. He counted at least 8 separate firing positions based on muzzle flashes and bullet impacts around his position. The fire was sustained, not the controlled volleys of well-disciplined bolt-action rifles, but continuous engagement with brief pauses as the Americans reloaded. His squad's machine gunner was forced to keep his head down, unable to effectively engage the Americans because their rifle fire was too heavy, too accurate, too constant. When the MG-42 did fire, it drew immediate concentrated fire from multiple American riflemen, forcing the gunner to displace or cease firing. Weber's squad mates were firing as quickly as they could work their bolt actions, but they were being outshot by American riflemen who could fire without breaking their aim, who could engage multiple times in the seconds it took a German soldier to cycle his bolt. The engagement ended when American artillery began falling on the German position, forcing Weber's squad to withdraw to their secondary line. 3 men from his squad had been wounded by rifle fire during the 15-minute firefight. None had been hit by machine gun fire. All 3 had been struck by aimed rifle shots from American soldiers who maintained sustained fire throughout the engagement. Weber himself had fired approximately 30 rounds, 6 full loads for his Kar 98K. He estimated the Americans had fired several hundred rounds, possibly more. That evening, discussing the engagement with Feldwebel Hoffmann, Weber asked whether the intelligence assessment about American rifles was accurate. Hoffmann confirmed it. Every American rifleman carried a semi-automatic weapon. The volume of fire they experienced was not anomalous. It was standard for American infantry. Weber asked the obvious question. If the Americans could fire 3 or 4 times as many rounds as German riflemen, how were German infantry supposed to compete? Hoffmann had no answer that satisfied either of them. The official doctrine emphasized fire discipline, marksmanship, and the superior training of German infantry. But training did not change the mathematics of firepower. A well-trained German rifleman with a Kar 98K could not match the output of an adequately trained American rifleman with an M1 Garand. The weapon compensated for differences in training through mechanical advantage. German soldiers throughout Normandy were reaching similar conclusions. A report from the Panzer Lehr Division, one of the better equipped and better trained German units in France, noted that American infantry demonstrated unexpectedly heavy and sustained small arms fire, and that their semi-automatic rifles provided them with a significant tactical advantage in meeting engagements and assault operations. The report recommended that German infantry avoid close-range engagements with American forces when possible, and rely more heavily on machine guns and artillery for suppression. But avoiding close-range engagements was not always possible, and machine guns and artillery were not always available. Infantry combat frequently devolved into small unit actions where riflemen faced riflemen. And in those engagements, the M1 Garand provided American soldiers with a weapon that fundamentally changed the calculus of combat. German soldiers who had trained for years with their Kar 98K rifles, who trusted those rifles and shot them accurately, found themselves outgunned by American soldiers who might have been in uniform for less than a year. The psychological impact of this realization was significant. German infantry had entered the war with confidence in their equipment and training. The Kar 98K was a known quantity, proven in combat, reliable, accurate. To discover that the enemy possessed a fundamentally superior individual weapon, not just better tanks or more artillery, but a better rifle, challenged assumptions about German tactical and technological superiority. Captured German documents from late 1944 included several references to American rifle superiority. A training memorandum distributed to replacement units being sent to the Western Front noted that American infantry were equipped with semi-automatic rifles that provide them with significantly greater firepower than German bolt-action rifles, and that German soldiers should not expect parity in rifle fire exchanges. The memorandum advised soldiers to rely on superior camouflage, positioning, and first shot accuracy to compensate for the American rate of fire advantage. This was a remarkable admission. German training doctrine, which had emphasized the superiority of German weapons and German soldiers, was now explicitly acknowledging that American infantrymen possessed better rifles and that German soldiers needed to compensate through other means. The Kar 98K, once considered entirely adequate for infantry combat, was now officially recognized as inferior to the standard American infantry weapon. German attempts to field their own semi-automatic rifles in large numbers failed due to industrial capacity constraints and design problems. The Gewehr 43, an improved semi-automatic rifle developed after experience on the Eastern Front, was produced in limited numbers, approximately 400,000 rifles by the end of the war. These were issued selectively to designated marksmen and assault troops, never as standard equipment for all infantrymen. The STG-44, the world's first true assault rifle, was even more limited in production and distribution. For American soldiers carrying the M1 Garand, the rifle was simply their weapon. They trained with it, qualified with it, cleaned it, and carried it through their service. Most did not think of it as technologically superior or revolutionary. It was heavy, yes. It was longer than they would have preferred. The en-bloc clip system meant you could not top off the magazine. You had to fire all 8 rounds before reloading. The distinctive ping when the clip ejected could potentially alert enemies to your empty rifle. But soldiers trusted it. The rifle worked in the rain, in the mud, in the dust of North Africa, and the hedgerows of France and the forests of Germany. It fired when you pulled the trigger. It hit where you aimed. And when you needed to put rounds downrange quickly, during an ambush or an assault or when holding a position against attack, the Garand delivered. Technical Sergeant John Basilone, who earned the Medal of Honor for his actions on Guadalcanal and later died on Iwo Jima, trained Marines on the M1 Garand during his stateside assignment between combat tours. He emphasized the rifle's reliability and the tactical advantages its rate of fire provided. In close combat, he taught, the ability to fire 8 rapid-aimed shots without working a bolt could mean the difference between living and dying. The Marine who could engage multiple targets in seconds, who could suppress an enemy position while advancing, who could maintain fire while displacing, had an advantage that no amount of training with a bolt-action rifle could overcome. Infantry after-action reports from American units consistently noted the M1 Garand's effectiveness. A report from the 1st Infantry Division, after the fighting around Aachen in October of 1944, stated that the M1 rifle continues to prove itself the superior individual infantry weapon, and that German prisoners frequently comment on the heavy volume of American rifle fire. The report noted that American infantry could establish fire superiority in small unit engagements through rifle fire alone, without necessarily requiring machine gun support. This capability changed how American infantry operated. Squads could advance under covering fire from their own rifles. Soldiers could engage targets while moving, maintaining suppressive fire that kept enemy soldiers from returning effective fire. The automatic nature of the rifle meant that soldiers' attention could remain focused on target acquisition and engagement, rather than on the manual process of cycling the action. The M1 Garand was not without limitations. In the Pacific, the rifle's length was problematic in dense jungle and in caves. The en-bloc clip system could be difficult to load in darkness or while prone. The rifle required maintenance, particularly keeping the gas system clean to ensure reliable cycling. Soldiers who failed to properly maintain their rifles experienced stoppages and malfunctions. But properly maintained M1 Garands were remarkably reliable, and soldiers learned quickly that keeping their rifle clean was not optional. By war's end, American industry had produced approximately 4 million M1 Garand rifles. Springfield Armory manufactured over 3 million. Winchester produced over 500,000. Harrington and Richardson, International Harvester, and other contractors produced additional quantities. Every American infantry division, every Marine division, every rifle company had M1s as standard equipment. The United States Army was the only major combatant to field a semi-automatic rifle as its standard infantry weapon throughout the war. General George S. Patton, commanding the Third Army during its drive across France and into Germany, called the M1 Garand the greatest battle implement ever devised. While Patton's statement reflected his characteristic hyperbole, it also reflected the genuine respect American commanders had for the rifle. It worked, it was reliable, and it gave American infantrymen a significant tactical advantage in the basic infantry task of shooting at the enemy. German soldiers who survived the war and later wrote about their experiences consistently mentioned American firepower as one of the most significant challenges they faced. The volume of artillery, the numbers of tanks, the presence of air support. These were expected from an enemy with America's industrial capacity. But the rifle fire, the sustained, heavy, accurate fire from American infantry positions, surprised them. The irony of the German assessment of the M1 Garand as too heavy was that weight was the least important of the rifle's characteristics. Yes, it was heavier than the Kar 98K by approximately 1.5 pounds. But that additional weight purchased mechanical reliability, sustained rate of fire, and tactical flexibility that transformed what infantry could accomplish with their individual weapons. German doctrine, built around the concept of the machine gun as the primary source of infantry firepower with riflemen in supporting roles, was not necessarily wrong. The MG-42 was an excellent weapon, and German infantry tactics that emphasized its employment were effective. But the doctrine assumed that enemy riflemen would be equipped with bolt-action rifles comparable to the Kar 98K, providing roughly equivalent individual firepower. When that assumption proved false, when American riflemen could collectively output as much fire as a light machine gun, the doctrinal foundation became questionable. A squad of 8 American riflemen with M1 Garands could, for brief periods, match or exceed the firepower of an MG-42. The machine gun still had advantages in sustained fire and longer range effectiveness, but in the close-range engagements that characterized much infantry combat, American rifle squads could establish fire superiority without necessarily requiring their Browning automatic rifle to engage. This capability meant American infantry could operate more flexibly, could break down into smaller elements without losing combat effectiveness, and could maintain fire during movement in ways that bolt-action armed infantry could not. The German failure to properly evaluate this capability before experiencing it in combat reflected a broader problem in German military assessment. German intelligence was often excellent at gathering information about enemy equipment and capabilities, but the analysis of that information sometimes suffered from confirmation bias, interpreting data to support existing doctrinal assumptions rather than questioning those assumptions when evidence suggested they might be flawed. The assessment that the M1 Garand was too heavy focused on a measurable, quantifiable characteristic while missing the qualitative transformation the weapon represented. Weight could be measured precisely. 1.5 pounds was a real difference. But the tactical value of sustained rate of fire, the psychological impact of receiving heavy rifle fire, the flexibility of employment that semi-automatic operation provided, these were harder to quantify and were dismissed as less significant than they proved to be in combat. By the time German forces on the Western Front fully understood what the M1 Garand meant for American infantry capability, the strategic situation had deteriorated to the point where equipment disparities were among the least of Germany's problems. The industrial base was being bombed, resources were depleted, manpower was exhausted. The question of whether German infantry should have been equipped with semi-automatic rifles became academic when there was barely industrial capacity to produce adequate numbers of bolt-action rifles and ammunition. After the war, the Soviet Union adopted semi-automatic and later selective fire rifles as standard infantry weapons, having learned from their experience with the SVT-40 and from observation of American M1 Garands. Britain developed the EM-2, a semi-automatic rifle that was later superseded by adoption of the FN-FAL. Germany, divided and occupied, would eventually equip its reconstituted armies with modern selective fire rifles. The bolt-action rifle, as a primary infantry weapon, disappeared from modern militaries, replaced by semi-automatic and automatic designs that trace their conceptual lineage back to John Garand's innovation. The soldiers who carried Kar 98K rifles through the war were not poorly equipped by the standards of 1939. Their rifles were well-made, accurate, and reliable. But warfare had evolved, and the United States had evolved with it, equipping its infantry with a weapon that represented the next generation of small arms design. The weight of the M1 Garand, the characteristic German intelligence identified as its primary weakness, was irrelevant compared to what that weight purchased in combat effectiveness. Obergefreiter Hans Weber survived the war. In interviews conducted decades later, he spoke about his experiences in Normandy and the fighting that followed. When asked about American equipment advantages, he mentioned tanks, artillery, and air support, all the massive material superiority everyone expected. But he also mentioned the rifles, the sustained fire that came from American positions, the volume of rounds that American infantry could put down range, the psychological impact of being on the receiving end of that fire, knowing that your own rifle, no matter how accurately you shot it, could not match what the Americans could do with theirs. He was asked whether the M1 Garand's additional weight mattered. Weber laughed. Weight meant nothing, he said, when the rifle firing at you could shoot 5 times as fast as yours could shoot back. The Americans understood that. The German High Command did not, or understood too late for it to matter. The war had many turning points, many moments where equipment or tactics or strategy made differences in outcomes. The M1 Garand was not one of the dramatic turning points. It did not win battles by itself, but it gave American infantry an advantage in the most basic infantry combat task, shooting at the enemy, and that advantage accumulated across thousands of small engagements into a significant tactical superiority that German infantry could not overcome. The rifle was too heavy, German assessments said. They were right about the weight. They were catastrophically wrong about whether that mattered. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.